inviting me to discuss this paper. I'm really excited to tell you about this work that's joint with my wonderful co-author, Yewan Kim, entitled Supply and Demand for Sustainability Features. So the main motivation for this paper is the increased stated interest among seemingly all market actors for sustainability, right? So consumers state that sustainability is an important purchase criterion. Firms are increasingly tracking and reporting ESG metrics, and policymakers are increasingly proposing and in some cases enacting legislation that's related to promoting both sustainable consumption and production. Yet, even within this context, many questions remain about whether and how the markets are evolving towards sustainable production and consumption, particularly in the non-durable consumer markets, right? So your consumable goods markets. Existing literature has thought about more in depth about providing incentives for, let's say, EVs, which are sort of durable consumer products, but less so on the consumable side. So the kind of questions that remain are, do consumers purchase sustainable products at an increasing rate? A lot of the work that we know about here comes from lab studies where, researchers have documented something called the green gap, where there's a distinct difference between the stated desire to buy sustainable products and then the stated purchase of sustainable products. Something called the sustainability liability, where consumers might think that there's a trade-off between the quality of the product and the sustainable nature of that product. But on the positive side, something called the sustainability halo effect, where a consumer might generalize the sustainable features of a particular company to also apply to other dimensions of sustainability, for instance, right? We aim to contribute to this literature a large-scale empirical study with field data documenting revealed preference for sustainability and trying to understand what's kind of driving this revealed preference to some extent. The second question is, do firms provide more products with sustainability features over time? And if so, at what price? Existing research uses field data such as ours, but to think about kind of in-store availability and less so about the kind of brands that might be providing products with features and how that's changing over time. So that's something that we're going to tackle here as well. And then, of course, the final question kind of related to the first two is, what are the barriers to sustainable markets that policymakers should remove, if any? And what's going right in these markets, if anything? Why do we care? Well, first of all, consumable goods are a really large size of the US economy. So in itself, we might care about the sustainable consumption in these markets. But also, there's a lot of discussion about potential policies that should be put into place in order to sort of foster sustainable production and consumption in these markets. And these policies are of a few different kinds. So one is something like sustainable production mandates. So all packaging will need to be environmentally sustainable by a certain point in time in the future, right? That could be one. Another one is sustainability labeling standards. So in order to claim that packaging is sustainable, it has to be recyclable to a certain level, right? So kind of putting some threshold in order to sort of really claim that feature. And the third set is something like non-sustainable consumption taxes, which would put a tax on products that do not have sustainability features. One example is the meat tax under the discussion in Netherlands, which would basically tax meat consumption. All right? And yet many of these a lot of policies are being discussed, but many of them are based on exploratory analysis or sort of a subset of products that are kind of the most salient. And so we, again, aim to sort of contribute a larger scale study here to be able to speak to some of these potential policies. So the question that we ask is, in non-durable consumer goods markets where sustainability features in the US, at least, are currently not regulated, right? What are the supply and demand factors that influence the market shares of products with these sustainability features? In part one, I'll show you some descriptive of an analysis of market shares, of provision and pricing. And in part two, we're really going to try to disentangle these supply and demand side factors. And all of this in service to speak to the question of, how can we better inform both marketing and policy design, knowing what are the different forces that are driving the sustainable consumption and production. Okay, so the data that we'll use, we're going to focus on health and beauty care categories, and we're going to focus on the largest 20 health and beauty care categories. So you should be thinking things like conditioner, deodorant, toothpaste, lipsticks, a variety of different kinds of products, but all sort of fitting in the broad category of health and beauty care. We are using Nielsen RMS data, which provide us with a rich panel of prices and how they're changing over time, as well as a rich set of products. So we're going to have kind of a good universe of products in these 20 categories, as well as their prices and the variation over time. We're also going to use the Nielsen HMS data, which is essentially the household panelist data, in order to understand the demographics of consumers that are buying products with sustainability features. That's really going to be where we bring in the household panelist data. It's going to help us in our demand estimation to really uncover that observed heterogeneity in demand here. And the final piece of data that we're going to have is this unique data on product labels and product information. Right, so we're going to have detailed information on sustainability features of the product, as well as the ingredients of the product, which are going to make up the formulation of that product, which we're going to use in kind of ruling out some explanations that we observe. All right, so what are these features? In our data, we have 39 distinct sustainability features, which we then group into 6 distinct categories. I'm giving you some examples here. These are by no means exhaustive. But for instance, vegan and cruelty-free would go into the animal welfare feature category. Post-consumer recycled paper and TerraCycle would go into the sustainable packaging category, and certified B Corporation would go into the social responsibility category. You notice that even up front, I was sort of vague about sustainability features and ESG features. The reason is because we have a variety of these features, right? So they are both on the environmental side or the social side, and so we kind of have the richness there. In the talk, I will both focus on kind of the different feature types and highlight some of the differences there, and in some cases, for ease of exposition, just collapse them into a presence of sustainable features or not, and in order to sort of showcase the results when there's not a lot of differences across. The other thing that's worth noting about the data is that we're going to consider separately large and fringe brands. And the reason that we do that is because early on in our data analysis, we noticed very distinct patterns in both provision of sustainability features and the pricing of these features by these 2 types of brands. So how do we define it? Large brands in our case are going to be the large incumbent brands in a pre-period, so in our case, 2012. And these are the brands that take the top market share, right? So you should be thinking of your Dove example, for instance. The rest we're going to classify into fringe brands. These are going to be small incumbents in 2012, as well as new entrants since 2012, right? So everything else is going to be sort of in our fringe brand category. Okay, so that's kind of the highlights of the key things that you should know about the data. And now comes the descriptive analysis. So the first thing that we see is that the average market share, and here I define market share as the quantity sold of products with sustainability features divided by overall quantity, right? So the average market share of products with sustainability features is increasing over time. And in fact, between 2012 and 2020, we see about a 35% increase over time in the market share of these sustainability features. We also see that most of this growth is actually due to fringe brands. So if we split the market share by brand type, large and fringe, and focus on the green line, which is again the market share, the market quantity share, we see that nearly all of the growth is coming from these fringe brands. Right? So fringe brands provide more of the products with sustainability features, and have an increasing kind of rate of provision, and also account for an increasing rate of market share. The red line here is the availability share, which is the share of unique products with sustainability features, which is just kind of counting products, right? And so we see that fringe brands have a really high share. They start at a lower market share, but in fact, by 2020, that market share is getting close to the large brands' market share. right? So that growth is kind of really coming from those fringe brands. And in fact, the fringe brands are also more responsible for narrowing the availability market share gap that we see here. All right, so kind of very distinct pattern in at least the provision of products with sustainability features. The next question that we ask is a question about price, right? So what is the price of these products, right? Do we see a price premium? The way that we measure our price premium, I mean, I won't show you the regression that we use, but essentially you should think about within a given store, within a given approximate package size, how much more expensive is a product with sustainability features relative to one without? What we see in the first three columns is that when we allow for a cross-brand variation, actually, we measure a price discount in many of the years, right? Now, if we control for brand identity, which is in the next three columns, we see that actually within brand, there is a price premium. What does this tell us? It tells us that the brand identity, the brand that's providing these products with sustainable features, is actually really important, right? And in fact, when we split this again into our large and fringe brands, we see that it's the fringe brands that have the higher price premium on products with sustainability features relative to the large brands. Now, we also see a decrease in price premium over time. So if you compare columns 2013, 2017, 2019, we see kind of broadly a decrease for fringe brands and a little bit of an increase for the large brands. So there's kind of this over time variation as well, but what we'll see over and over again is actually that it's this level difference that matters between the large and the fringe brands. So it's the composition of the products that are in the market that are going to be driving a lot of the results. Okay, so just to summarize really quickly the descriptive evidence, right? We see that availability and market share of products with sustainability features has increased. Sustainable feature price premia have mostly decreased except for one feature type, which is the packaging. But we see the provision and pricing of products with sustainability features is very much tied to the brand identity, right? And in particular, it's these fringe brands that offer these products at a higher rate. They have higher price premium, but also higher decreases over time. Now, of course, there's both supply and demand side factors that could be behind these patterns. And so the next thing that we do is we engage in a demand supply estimation exercise in order to be able to disentangle these drivers and use that understanding to speak to our firm implications as well as our policy implications. So for those of you that were here for Giovanni's talk, we do exactly the kind of complicated demand estimation exercise that he discussed. And we estimate demand for individually for the different product categories. All right, so this is going to be the only slide like this that I show, and I won't go through all the details here, but I do want to highlight a few things, right? So what we're going to measure are preferences for products here. And the way that we're going to define a product is a brand and sustainability feature type. So the kind of thing that you should be thinking about is, you know, Dove Refresh and Care with animal welfare features, right? That's going to be our product. We're going to estimate preferences for these products, and we're going to allow for observable demographic differences in demand. And in particular, we're going to consider both income and age as potential drivers of observable differences in demand for products with sustainability features. When we think about kind of the pricing problem of the firm, we're going to consider pricing by a brand like Dove of their entire product line. So they're going to be engaged in, you know, joint profit maximization of the entire product line. They're going to be pricing the different products in their lines, sort of knowing that pricing one product is going to cannibalize demand from another, et cetera. Okay, so what do we see? I'll only give you a summary of the relevant demand estimates and not focus as much on the firm side. But the main thing that I want you to take away is that demand is still sustainable, for sustainable features is still relatively niche on average. Right, so when we look at these green lines, which show average preferences for products with sustainability features, we see that relative to large brands with no sustainability features, average preferences for products with sustainability features are lower for both fringe and large brands, right? And the level is actually pretty similar. What's interesting is that when you look within brand type, large brands experience kind of a preference penalty, right, when they have sustainability features. Fringe brands do not. So when you compare the green and the gray lines on the right panel, you see that fringe brands are preferred about equally if they do have sustainability features or they do not. Right? So this tells us that there's perhaps a stronger demand for fringe brands with sustainability features relative to the large brands. What's not on the slide is, but I do want to mention is we find higher preferences for products with sustainability features among higher income and younger households, which perhaps is not surprising, but it's an interesting point to sort of document and highlight here as well. The last thing I want to mention here is that we also see that demand for fringe brands' sustainable features is significantly less price elastic. So here, instead of plotting average preferences, I'm showing you average elasticities for products with sustainable features. And we see that actually demand for large brands' products with sustainability features is much more price elastic relative to the fringe brands. The fringe brands actually have the least price elastic demand relative to the full set of the kind of four comparisons that we have here. Okay, so we see kind of a differentiated demand for fringe and large brands features, products with sustainability features. And then the next question that we ask is, why could that be, right? What could explain these differences? And so we do a number of supplementary analysis to this point. We start with kind of some hypothesis of what might be going on, right? So the one potential explanation is that consumers have stronger preferences for brand level rather than UPC or product level sustainability features. Why might that be? Well, if I'm somebody who wants to buy products with sustainability features and the brand offers both sustainable, non-sustainable, I might think that I'm still supporting a brand that has non-sustainable products, right, if I'm buying from that brand. Versus if I'm buying from a brand that's in the full product line has sustainability features, then I'm supporting a more sustainable brand. And we actually find a lot of evidence in favor of this explanation. So what do we see? We see that, first of all, fringe brands are more likely to provide entire product lines where each product has some sort of sustainability feature. That's point one. We also, when we look at kind of the preferences of consumers, we see that the consumers' preferences for sustainable features are increasing in the share of UPCs or products within that product line that have these features. And this is true for both large and fringe brands. Except for large brands, it's actually more difficult because of their long product lines to make their entire product line sustainable, right? And so what we see actually large manufacturers doing, instead of adding these additional products, we see large manufacturers launching new brands that kind of look much more like fringe brands that have the full product line with sustainability features, right? So all of these points sort of point to the fact that there might be something about brand level sustainability features that might be important. The other idea that we had is that it could be that large brands are actually just providing features that are less valued by consumers, right? And why might they do that? Well, because they might face some sort of trade-off in reformulation, right? So in order to achieve animal welfare, you might have to change the ingredients of your product, and large brands might have a tougher time doing that if consumers have come to expect some sort of level of quality or some particular experience from the product. We actually don't find much evidence in favor of this explanation. We do find some evidence for reformulation frictions for large brands, but actually we don't see evidence that it's maybe preventing them from providing features that are really valued by consumers. So not really kind of an explanation that we think is the front runner here. On the third point, the last explanation could be that fringe brands with sustainability features are just of higher quality on average. And that could be along the sustainability dimension. It could also be along other dimensions. We find some evidence that fringe brands do have products that are of higher quality. The reason we say that is because they have distinct formulations against distinct ingredients. We also recover high marginal costs for the products of fringe brands. Now, high marginal costs could be due to scale inefficiencies of small products or to actual quality differences. Here, we use information that we sort of hand collect about the manufacturer of the fringe brand in order to account for the scale inefficiency, and we still uncover differences in marginal costs, which suggests that it's more of a quality story. What's interesting is that we don't actually see evidence that these fringe brands products are more sustainable, rather that they're different or higher quality on other dimensions. And so what do we have here? there's a lot of evidence in favor of brand level sustainability mattering and consumers preferring brand level sustainable features. And also some evidence that actually there's quality differences between large and fringe brands that are on other dimensions than sustainability that might be driving the differential demand. So what are the implications? Well, for brands, right, the implication is that brand level, not UPC level, sustainability features are important, right? So if you're thinking about kind of sustainability investment, you might think about a full product line that's sustainable rather than adding additional products within that product line and differentiating your product line by these sustainability features. The second point is that, for fringe brands, there could be payoff in bundling other high quality features about the product with sustainability, right? Demand payoff for doing something like that. And we also have a number of kind of implications for policymakers, we think, because if we think that it's really kind of brand level sustainability features that are making a difference, then, well, sustainability production mandates, if they're well publicized and well enforced, should eliminate this kind of differentiation. If I, as a consumer, know that everything that I'm buying is likely to be sustainable in that particular dimension, then there's no longer this kind of differentiation at the brand level that's happening. On the flip side, right, sustainability labeling standards might not do much unless they induce the large brands to reformulate. Non-sustainable consumption taxes seem potentially only negative in this context, given that we uncovered that higher income households might prefer products with sustainability features. So if you start taxing the non-sustainable products, that's kind of taxing disproportionately the lower income households. And in addition, because we uncovered these differences in quality, it's likely that if you start taxing non-sustainable consumption, then lower income households are more likely to switch to the cheaper alternative, which turns out also to be the lower quality alternative, which would compound any sort of distributional effects that we have. This part is very much in progress still. I didn't mention it, right? But we're sort of estimating all of our demand at scale. We currently have a subset of the categories. We're sort of going through each of the categories. It is a bit of a process, but we think that at least kind of the main insights are likely to hold given what we've seen so far. So thank you very much. That concludes my talk, and I'm looking forward to any comments.